coming. We want you to know that you're always welcome here because you are. And it's a great day that we can be together. And not only just to worship together, but today also we want to welcome you, of course, to Family Day. I think you already know that by now. A lot of you come back every year, and we're always thankful for your presence. So thank you for being here today. Just a couple of things before I get into the lesson today. First of all, a beautiful wedding last night, the Singleton wedding, and our congratulations to them. And they're here today. So if you see them, congratulate them on a beautiful wedding and the beginning of their marriage together. And so Donnie and Bobby Jean, we're very proud of you, and we just pray that God will bless you in every good way. Also here was a great weekend here with a glow, and had probably as many here as we've ever had. And so things went very, very well. Of course, not being of the female persuasion, I wasn't able to be here, but what I hear was just great. So I appreciate Lori and all of you that have done so much to make this possible. It's always great. When we can have occasions like that. We know a lot of people benefited from that. So that and a lot of other things, we're just so grateful that we're able to be together today. Again, thank you for coming. We pray that God will be glorified. We pray that everyone here will be built up by our time together. Also, let me just remind you, the church here already knows this, but we have a praise and harmony workshop that is coming up about just less than 3 weeks away. And we want to encourage especially the people here, but anybody's invited on Friday night and Saturday night. This will be May 16 and 17, of course, will be the Sunday. And we would encourage you to come be with us all the time. But that is a time, if you enjoy singing, want to learn how to do congregational singing better, this is to help us to do just that. So keep that in mind. Today I want to talk about family. And I want to begin in a very fundamental kind of way. It is said that Vince Lombardi, by many, would say that he was the greatest football coach of all time. And still, the National Football League still has their championship trophy named after him. It's a Vince Lombardi trophy. But they said it was interesting that every year when he started out with his new recruits, that he was a man that was feared like a lot of coaches, and said a lot of men were a lot bigger than him and a lot of them would come in just almost shaking. They just were so afraid to be in his presence. And if you ever went through one of his workouts, you learned, I guess, to be afraid of him in a lot of ways. But they said that every time when he would start that new day, he had a very motivational speech. Some of you have heard that, and they still use it in businesses and such like, because it is so great. But the first thing he would do is he would walk in, he'd look at everybody, and they were afraid to say a word. They wouldn't even clear their throats because they knew that this was a man that they need to be careful around. And it said that he would pick up a football, and he'd hold it in sometimes rather awkward kind of way, like he'd never picked up one before. And he'd start his speech by saying this: "Gentlemen, this is a football." And most of those guys have been playing football for most of their lives. But he would go on to talk about how that this was a football. Then after he'd said several things, he would take them out to the football field. He'd say, okay, these are marked off in yard lines, and he'd just talk about all the very basics of things. He'd take them up the sidelines. He said, okay, when you go across this, you're out of bounds. Now, these guys knew this, but they were listening with both ears. And he'd go over to the other side. He said, okay, if you pass this, you're out of bounds over here. And then he'd take them to the end zones, and he'd say, okay, here's the goal line. And then he would say, the object of this game is to get this football across this goal line because you make points that way. You might say, well, that's the most fundamental thing I think I've ever heard about football, especially for a professional. But he believed in the fundamentals. He believed that you could not win in life. He believed that surely you could not win on the football field if you didn't practice the fundamentals. So today, rather than trying to fill your head with a lot of statistics, what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about some fundamentals to successful families. I always appreciate Brother Jim. He always has an excellent lesson. If you didn't hear that, I would encourage you to get the CD because it's worth having. And I appreciate his emphasis on friendship and how it ties into the family. And I think he's dead on the mark because it really does. Today, as we think about some fundamentals, I want us to begin in a very fundamental way by saying that if you really want to know where to find what you need to know about the marriage, it's really right here. I told the Singletons last night, and I tell most couples that stand before me to get married, that this is the greatest marriage manual that has ever been penned. And I guarantee you, you might not find every specific detail, but in principle, you can find something to cover everything that you need to know in this particular book. There are a couple of passages that come to mind. The first is in Genesis chapter 2, where there we learn that marriage began. Of the three institutions that God ordained, we learn there's a civil government, there's a church, and there's the family. And the family is the oldest of all. And we learn that when God created, even in the Garden of Eden, as he watched Adam walk about, of all the things he had created, he said, you know, these things are good. But then God said there's something that is not good. And what was not good is that for man to be alone. So we learned that he caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam. Then he took one of his ribs, he closed up the flesh in its place, and from that rib he made a woman. Then he brought that woman to Adam. You remember that Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. The Bible goes on to say, therefore, shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they two shall become one flesh. Last night, as would be true with a lot of you somewhere along in life, you honored God by doing things that he wanted you to do to become husband and wife. And what God made is always good. What I want you to hear, that we face a lot of troubles in marriage in our day. I suppose the fresh issue that's on our minds is this same-sex marriage. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but I want to say this. We're talking about fundamentals. I'm not trying to hide my head in the sand. I think there are a lot of challenges that we're going to have to deal with as this comes along, and it's coming fast. But let me say that on a very practical level for you and me today, I pray that that never happens. But even if it becomes legal in our country by the Supreme Court, let me say that probably that's not going to be what makes or breaks your marriage. Now there again, I'm not trying to sweep it under the rug. I think it's a serious issue. But I'm saying on a very fundamental level, for you and me, that's probably not going to make or break us. So we need to remember there are some very fundamental things that the Bible has to say. And when we honor those things, then we learn there are blessings. When we transgress those things, then we know that we always have troubles. Let's always remember this. Anything that God ever made, it was always for good. Anything that God has ever created, it is always something that will bless our lives. So, if you're having problems in your relationship, I can guarantee you it's one of three things. You've got this one that's not honoring God when maybe even this one is. Or you've got this one that's honoring God and maybe this one isn't. Or both aren't honoring God. But I guarantee you every problem that we run into in our marriage, that's really the basis of it. What God created and set forth is a wonderful, it's a good thing, but anytime we violate His laws, I guarantee you we're going to have more problems than we can even imagine. So as we think about marriage, it is God's design. Psalm 127 and verse 1. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. I don't think he was talking about only marriage, but he certainly wasn't eliminating marriage from this, because it's true that marriage is God designed, and when we take out His design and use it, then it will bless it. That when we don't, we're always headed for troubles. Then point number 2. When we live in a family, we live in close quarters. Any kind of relationship in close quarters, you're going to have a little bit of a conflict somewhere along the way. Sometimes you've heard me say it like this, that in marriage, there are 3 states of marriage. Number 1 is that good one, and that is the state, what we call, of intimacy. When you're in intimacy, it means that we're happy about our relationship and things are going well. And we feel like that our needs are being fulfilled, and we're very happy about where we are. The second stage, everybody is going to face if you're married long enough, and you probably don't have to be married that long. And it is what we call conflict. That's when something comes up. That's when something happens. She said, he said, he did, she did. You know, it's something like that, and we don't like it, and maybe it hurt our feelings or whatever, makes us mad, whatever the case might be. So here we learn that communication is extremely important, so we can learn how to work these things out and move back to that first stage again, which is intimacy, because we got past that, and now we're back to being happy again. It may not last very long. It may last a while, but it has to be dealt with. However, if you don't learn good communication skills, and let me just say this, and I want you to hear me, to ask somebody else, and it doesn't have to be a licensed counselor, but it can be. There is nothing wrong with you, and don't think that there's something wrong with the two of you if you can't work out your own problems in going to someone else and get some help that will help you. I guarantee you that is far better than going to see the lawyer later on. You need to learn how to work things out, but if you can't do it yourselves, then you need some help to do that, and there are a lot of folks that are available that can help you. But if you stay in conflict long enough and don't resolve those issues, and they may start out little, but they're going to get bigger. And if you don't resolve those, they're going to grow. They don't go away. You can't sweep them under the rug. You have to deal with them before you get back to where you really want to be. But I guarantee you stay there long enough, you're not going to stay there. You're going to move on to that third phase, which I hope that no marriage would ever get to, but some do. And that is the area of withdrawal. When you withdraw, you say, I'm just so tired of fighting about that. We never seem to get anywhere. And I'm just fed up with it. I don't even want to fuss about it anymore. We don't get anywhere. It's just always a big fuss, and that's all it ever is. We don't resolve anything. And when you are in withdrawal, you're in the worst state of marriage you can be. Because not only have you faced conflict, but now you're saying, it's gotten to the point where I don't even care anymore. And when you get to where you don't even care anymore, you're in the worst problem you can be in. So you really need help at that point. If you don't, I don't have much hope for your marriage. And when I say that, I'm saying it cautiously, but at the same time, I'm being realistic. You've got to learn how to work through your conflict so you can get back to a state of intimacy. Conflict is inevitable, but we learn that combat is optional. Meaning that, yes, everybody is going to face some conflict. But now we ask ourselves, okay, when it comes along, how am I going to deal with it? In the book of Proverbs, again, Brother Jim has had us there live this morning. Good place to return for this. I've always liked especially verse 1, where we learn that a soft answer turns away wrath. Does that mean every time? No, maybe not every time, but the general rule is that's the way it works. Somebody makes a sharp remark towards you, husband or wife, the immediate thing, that the human thing that we want to do is just strike right back at them. But when we do, it's on after that. But if we learn that even though they might say something sharply and it might hurt our feelings, if we learn to kind of keep ourselves under control, it's not that they did the right thing, but we need to do the right thing, and usually we can steer this in a different direction. Because when we answer with harsh words, then that only stirs out wrath. So that is one thing that we need to keep in mind. But also, we turn to the New Testament in Ephesians chapter 4. And we learn that we are to put away some things in our lives when we become children of God. And here's a great point. You see, families are to be Christians too. We often talk about relationships and how to get along with one another, how to love one another and such like. And I'm always thinking about how I'm supposed to love George. And I'm thinking about how I'm supposed to love William. And I'm thinking about how I'm supposed to love Eva and those kinds of things. And that's all well and good. We should. But also I need to think about how I put these things in practice with Judy too at home. And how do we practice these things with our kids and now our grandkids and such like, because you see, families are to be Christians too. So there can be conflict, and probably most of all, conflict in families, because there again, we're a little tight bunch there, and we kind of elbow one another every once in a while, whether we mean to or not. So we need to learn how to deal with that. So now we learn that our new man in Christ tells us that we are to put away all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking of all kind, all with all malice, put all those things behind us. And then we learn that we are to be kind to one another. Husbands and wives are to be kind to one another at all times. Parents and children, children and parents need to learn to be kind to one another. Tender-hearted, and here is a great word again, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ has forgiven you. So we know that conflict is going to happen. But again, let's put it this way, conflict is inevitable, combat is optional. So you decide whether or not you're going to put on the gloves, but I've never known many couples that solve things just by yelling at one another. But when we can, in our more rational minds, learn how to work through things, then we're on to something good and learning how to communicate as we should. Then we move on to point number 3. I don't know if Einstein said this or not. It's most of all attributed to him. That whether he said it or not, it's still a great statement. And it says the definition of insanity is keeping on doing the same thing and expecting different results. You know that Judy comes from the great state of North Carolina, and they've got a lot of things in North Carolina that are very good. Women, one of them, woman, excuse me. But one of the great things also that they have there also would be they grow some fine peanuts. But they're not those little red ones like you put in peanut brittle. I mean, they have jumbo peanuts over there. And oh, they're good. And I got introduced to boiled peanuts when Judy and I got married, and I found out that's pretty good stuff. And I never had parched peanuts, as we call them, or you know, whatever. Thing that happened that Judy told me about a long time ago with one of her cousins. She said, as a little boy, he got one of those peanuts, and it wasn't green. I guess it was kind of hardened. It was stuff. So he took one of those jumbo peanuts, and he stuck it in his nose. And I mean, it went on in, and he couldn't get it out. And they couldn't get it out. Had to take him to the doctor to get that peanut out. Came back home. Some of the family sitting around, they said, "Son, how in the world did you get that peanut up your nose?" It's one of those things. You keep on doing the same thing, you keep on getting the same result. It's amazing to me that sometimes I have counsel with husbands or wives or both, and they say, "Well, here's a problem that we're having in our marriage." And I say, "Well, here's something I want you to try." And I always try to give them some godly principle. There again, that's the greatest book. Give them some godly principle that will help them in their relationship. Okay, you got it? Got it. What are you going to do? Here's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to really want you to try. Now, you know, give it your best shot. It may not work out as well as I hope, but at least give it a shot. We'll see you next week. Next week they come in. How's it going? Well, all right. Would you try what I told you? Well, no. You keep on doing the same thing, you keep on getting the same result. So if things are not working well for you the way that they're going now, how about let's try something different? And by different, I'm not saying something other than God's Word. We've already established the fact that when we do the things the right way, they always turn out the right way. But we need to learn how to do things in a godly way and stop the insanity. Just stop it. You know, sometimes folks ask me, well, how do we just stop bickering and picking at each other all the time? You just stop it. They say, well, I know that, but no. I said, no, you got the answer already. Just stop it. You can't make them stop, but you stop. And I guarantee you, if you stop, more than likely they're going to stop too. Or it's going to get better, one or the other. But you'll know it'll get better from your standpoint because you're going to stop the insanity. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, we learn that we are to have a transformed mind so that we might prove what's that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. You see, it's all about what happens with me and you. I can't change you. And I don't want to change much about her. But I don't want to change her, you see. But the thing about it is I can anyway. And she can't change me, probably as much as she'd really like to about some things. But you see, I can change myself. And so can you. But better put this way, Christ can change us. Christ can change us and should. He's the greatest counselor of all. Then, I know you've heard this before, but let's say it one more time. Again, we're talking about fundamentals here. That love is more than a noun, it is also a verb. Let me tell you, in case you haven't figured this out yet, your feelings, I'm talking about husbands and wives now, your feelings toward one another are not going to always be like this. more than likely they're going to be more like this, because that's the way emotions work. And there are some days you're not going to feel as in love as you do other days. And there's some days you're going to feel just so in love and you think, "Whoa, this is great." And other days you think, "What in the world did I get into?" And it's just like that. I mean, that's kind of the way it is. However, we learn that it's more than an emotion. If it were an emotion, we'd all be in trouble. But let's talk for just a moment about what the Bible says about what love really is. You know where I'm going, more than likely, if you haven't seen it up here already, 1 Corinthians 13. And let's look at these characteristics of love again. Love suffers long. Now, that's more than just an emotion. Love is patient. Love suffers long and is kind. Boy, there's that word again that we've already run across in Ephesians chapter 4. Love does not envy. I guarantee you, if you've got jealousy and envy in your relationship, you're in a miserable relationship, because it never adds to anything that is good. We learn that we're to not envy, or love does not envy, does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave brutally, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil. Let me tell you what thinks no evil is all about, if you do not have it in your margin. Maybe your version says this. It does not keep a record of wrongdoing. You know, I kind of have felt that sometimes with some folks, I realize, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I know of folks that are shut in and folks that are single. Maybe they're a widower, and I know it gets awfully lonely. I get that to a point. I've never been there, but I get what they're saying. I know they're awfully lonely, but I think they keep a calendar. And I know that some do. And I remember when I was out at Stony Point, there's one man in particular that I'd go and see his wife a bit, and bless her hearts, they just had so many struggles. And I'd go and see him. He said, "You haven't been here since February the 27th. And I get it. I see what they're saying, but I see that husband and wives apparently sometimes want to do that. They just kind of keep a running list in their minds, or I don't know, maybe they write it down. It seems that they keep a record, even though they might say, "Okay, I forgive you of that." It seems that they never really do. They bury the hatchet with the handle sticking out, and they keep on keeping the records. But love, the kind of love the Lord gives us, is not that kind of love. It doesn't keep an account of those things. And then we learn that it does not rejoice in iniquity, but it rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. You see, there again, it's a verb. It is not just a noun. But then we move on to the next point here, and that is, the grass is greener, not on the other side, but where you water it. Now, let me, again, take us back to Proverbs one more time. In chapter 5, it is interesting to me that Proverbs takes up so much time talking about relationships of husband and wives, and especially warning against stepping beyond the bounds of husband and wife. You ever thought about that? A lot of attention is given to that particular area. And if you know what I know, and a lot of you do, you think a lot of folks need to read Proverbs in our day and time, because there's a lot of unfaithfulness that goes on. Let me tell you what a marriage counselor within the church told me one time, and I think he's right. He's been doing this for many, many years. Has his doctorate in psychology. He said, "Stan, let me tell you," he said, "something I've learned." He said, "In any congregation of any size," again, not talking about community, we're talking about congregation. Any congregation of any size, he said, "I guarantee you, you may never know of this," but he said, "there's probably at least 2 or 3 affairs that are going on at any given time." He didn't necessarily mean within, although that could be the case, but he said probably some folks are involved in that kind of activity. Solomon said, "Drink from your own cistern and running water from your own wells." You know what he's saying? He's saying, you've got a wife, you've got a husband, work on that relationship. And you see, don't be thinking about what I can do on Facebook, and don't be thinking about how I can get in contact with somebody, and this lady I work with or this man over here said, think about your own relationship and work on that. And he says that's where your focus needs to be, because that's what God intends for you to do. But then we can go a little bit beyond that as we think about children, as we think about focus. Again, the grass is greener where we water it. Proverbs 22:6, you all know. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he shall not depart from it. We probably have abused that to a great degree because there's nobody that just automatically pushes the right buttons and pulls all the right levers, and suddenly a perfect kid turns out. But there's a general principle that is true here. And that is, if we intend to raise our children in a godly way, then we're going to have to raise them in a godly way, both by word and example. How often lately have you been thinking about your kids? And thinking that, if my kid turns out to be just like me, am I going to be happy about that or not? There are no guarantees of how your children are going to turn out, but I think there are general principles that are true. And I think if we ever want them to turn out to serve the Lord, we better be living that before them, because that's the best chance that we've got. When we focus on certain areas, when I focus on Judy, when I focus on children, when I focus on grandchildren, you see, I tend to give a lot of attention in that area. And the grass gets a whole lot greener when I do. And the same is true with you too. But then moving on, finally today, in pulling this all together, it may sound just as simple as falling off a log. But the truth is, I said it a while ago, you can't change other folks, you got to change yourself. So what I'm calling on all of us to do is this: you be the change. You see, a lot of folks say, well, when she starts doing better, then, or when he starts doing this, then I'll, and we're waiting one another out. And even if they make a motion, well, I'm going to wait a while and see if it really works. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you start working on yourself right now, and you be the change. You get this thing, you get the ball rolling. Don't wait them out. Don't see what they're going to do. You go ahead and make the changes you need to make in your own life. And you be the change. And I guarantee you it'll make a difference. It always does. And sometimes it's a matter of attitude. Attitude may be a little thing, but when it comes to relationships, it makes a big difference. And when you're always thinking negatively about your spouse, when you think negatively about your children, and when you think negatively about your parents, and when you kind of look, if that's going on in your mind all the time, you need to learn to change your thinking. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So we need to change our thinking and let the mind of Christ be in us, because that can make a difference. And, of course, as we bring this to a conclusion today, let's drop back one more time to a fella that one time made a huge statement that you and I are still encouraged by today. In fact, we've got a plaque at our house that still bears these words. And you'll remember from Joshua chapter 24 and verse 15. When he stood up before Israel and made that great statement, he said, look, I know what our fathers did on the other side of the river, and you know it too. You know how they lived, you know the gods that they served, but I tell you what, you're going to have to make a choice right now. Now, he was trying to encourage them to say, you need to be serving God of heaven. He's the only God anyway. You ought to put your hearts in Him. You need to trust Him, but I can't make you. But he said, I can do something about it myself. He said, as much as in me, for me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord. I believe that he said that day, and obviously what we know about him, he already had a godly mind, but now that things have settled down, he said, I guarantee you what you're going to see in me from now on is you're going to see a God-centered life. And it's going to be with me, it's going to be in my family. I'm not just going to wear it like a window shade. He said, it's going to be my life. And you come to my house and you'll see that's going to be carried out there too, because you can't serve God part-time. God has to infiltrate every part of our lives if we really want to be devoted to Him. So, fundamentals. These are the things that we have discussed here today. But I'm calling on you as we bring this down to the finish line to say, you be the change. It may not be that there's anyone in this audience today that needs to make some kind of public response. But there are probably things that we all can do and need to do, and we need to be the change of saying, I'm going to be a better husband. I'm going to be a better daddy. I realize that, that's a fundamental thing. Your grass is greener where you water it. And I'm going to start putting attention on my kids, and I'm going to be a better daddy to them. And I'm going to be a better husband to my wife. And the things that I know but I'm not doing, I'm going to start putting those in practice. Not only that, from what was read this morning from Ephesians 5, I know I'm the head of this family, and I'm supposed to take spiritual leadership in this family. And I'm going to step out there and I'm going to do something maybe I haven't been doing, or if I used to do and I don't do anymore. But right now I'm going to make a change in my life, and it'll make a change in my family. I guarantee you, you will and can, and God bless you in doing so. Maybe as a wife, you say, I used to do things a lot better than I do now, but somehow I've gotten off kilter. Somehow my priorities have gotten skewed. And I'm just not the wife right now that I need to be. I'm not the mother to my kids that I need to be. But I know with God's help, I can get back on the right track again, and I'm willing to do that right now. I'm going to be the change in my family. I'm going to be the wife to my husband that I need to be. I'm going to be the mother to my kids I need to be, because I realize not only is that important to them, but God expects it of me. And maybe as a young person, maybe as a child in the family, I can remember a lot of times when the preachers would bring up how that we are to honor our father and mother, and how that we are to obey them. I would feel so guilty sometimes, because I realized my attitude sometimes would get so out of sorts. And I guess deep down, maybe I was all the more disappointed in myself, because I knew I was disappointing God, because Christ wasn't seen living in me. But you can be the change too. You can say, I'm going to start, regardless of how things have been, I'm going to start walking in the steps of Jesus. Now I'm going to change my attitude, and you can do that. Everybody can change their attitude. I'm going to change my attitude, and I'm going to change my behavior, and I'm going to start being the young person that God expects me to be. Fundamental things, but things we often don't put into practice. Vince Lombardi knew that if they didn't start out with the fundamentals, it didn't matter what else they did in football, they were going to be defeated. The same is true with marriage. If you don't practice the fundamentals, it doesn't matter about all the other stuff you do. You're already on a shaky foundation that is never going to last. May God help us all to have successful families. As we sing this song of encouragement today, we may have someone here who desires to become a Christian. We may have someone here that says, I need some help. I need prayers. I need to confess some things. I need folks to be on my side. And I especially need God on my side. And you feel like we can help you in some way in praying for you and encouraging you. We'll be glad to do that. As we sing this song of encouragement, if you're subject to the Lord's invitation, would you come while together we